Hello and welcome. I'm James Zimoha and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. The US says it stopped a surprise Iran missile attack on its bases in the Middle East and joined forces with the Saudis in retaliatory strikes. 13 people are confirmed dead as the search for survivors continues after Japan's latest earthquake. And Turkey's president announces a major oil deal with Iraq as its prime minister visits Ankara. Now, sources say Iran is expected to receive up to 400 Chinese-made air defense missile systems in the coming weeks as Tehran moves to rebuild its military capabilities following months of conflict with the United States and Israel. The $70 million deal involves shoulder-fired missiles designed to protect strategic sites from drones and was reportedly brokered by a Hong Kong-based company. While sources claim the weapons will transit through Pakistan, both Beijing and Islamabad have officially dismissed the reports. Now, the US says it has intercepted an Iranian missile attack on its bases in the Middle East and launched retaliatory strikes backed by Saudi Arabia. Washington says sites in Iraq used by Iran-backed militia groups have been targeted. Here's more.
The United States says Iran launched multiple ballistic missiles at American forces in the Middle East in what it described as an attempted surprise attack. According to US Central Command, all of the missiles were successfully intercepted and no target locations were disclosed. In response, US and Saudi Arabian forces carried out strikes on what Central Command called Iran-aligned terrorist logistics and weapons sites in eastern Iraq. Washington says the operation was a direct response to more than 30 drone attacks over the past 72 hours, which it says were directed by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Central Command warned that Iran and its allied groups must stop the attacks or face further military action. Iran has not yet commented on the latest developments. Earlier in the day, Saudi Arabia said it had intercepted drones targeting petroleum facilities in the country's eastern region. The renewed exchange of strikes comes just one day after US President Donald Trump spoke of what he described as very friendly negotiations with Iran. The latest military action ends a 3-day pause in fighting that had raised hopes for diplomacy. That pause followed nearly 2 weeks of US airstrikes in southern Iran, which Washington says targeted tunnels and bridges. Despite talk of possible negotiations, major differences remain, particularly over the Strait of Hormuz, while Tehran continues to deny that any formal talks are taking place.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps has confirmed that it carried out a missile attack on a US command base in Jordan. The group also says it has halted 3 oil tankers that it claims were sailing illegally in the Strait of Hormuz. Turaj Shirelilu has more.
Iran's Revolutionary Guards (IRGC) confirmed that its aerospace force targeted a U.S. military base in Jordan with scores of ballistic missiles early on Wednesday. According to Sepah News, the IRGC stressed, and I quote, "the threats by the U.S. officials and their illegal interventions against Iran's interests shall stop." The missile strike came after 2 days of a lull when tit-for-tat attacks between Iran and the U.S. had stopped. However, Wednesday's strike coincided with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Washington, the first in 5 months. It's amid reports that US President Donald Trump is dissatisfied with Israeli intelligence. In another development, the Revolutionary Guard said its Navy units hit and stopped 3 tankers at Iran's southern waters, which it said intended to transit through what it called unsafe and illegal routes. The force warned in a statement, and I quote, "illegal interventions and embargoes of the US military against vessels in the region will not go unanswered." It referred to the US blockade of Iran's ports and its escorting of vessels at the Strait of Hormuz. Meantime, the spokesman for the Khatam al-Anbiya central headquarters warned that any company or country that receives money from frozen Iranian assets will not be allowed to pass through the strategic waterway. According to the Defa Press website, which covers Iran's military and defense news, Ebrahim Zolfaqari slammed US President Donald Trump's threat of compensation for vessels damaged in the war from Iran's blocked assets. Previously, on Monday, the Joint Operational Command of Iran's armed forces had warned that any US effort to impose a naval blockade on Iran would be regarded as an escalation of the conflict, promising that the Iranian armed forces would respond to any hostile action. Turaj Shiralilu from Tehran for A News.
Now, the foreign ministers of Ukraine and Iran have held talks following Ukrainian strike on an Iranian commercial vessel in the Caspian Sea. Both sides confirmed they are inclined to prevent the incident from escalating. Sabiha described Tuesday's call with Arachi as a frank dialogue aimed at de-escalation. He said Ukraine's actions were defensive and not intended to target civilian vessels or people. Arachi said Iran did not seek escalation but demanded compensation for the losses. Saturday's strike caused an explosion aboard the ship, killing one sailor and prompting Tehran to summon Ukraine's charge d'affaires. All right, after the break, Zelensky and Trump held a meeting in Washington. We'll be back soon. Welcome back to A News. Now, Ukraine's president says Kyiv struck several Russian targets on Wednesday. In response, Russia's defense ministry said its forces struck 2 vessels carrying weapons and military equipment to Ukrainian ports near Odessa. Meanwhile, Russian officials reported Ukrainian drone strikes in the Belgorod region that killed 3 people and injured 19 others. Further strikes were reported in other Russian regions, with online retailer Wildberries saying it evacuated one logistics hub following safety advice. Now, Russia's largest online retailer, Wildberries, is facing a severe crisis after Ukrainian drone strikes destroyed key warehouses, with thousands of sellers facing massive financial losses. The Kremlin is now considering emergency support. To survive the sudden storage shortage, the retail giant is looking to expand its operations into neighboring Kazakhstan.
The Russian government is considering support measures for the country's largest online retailer, Wildberries, and thousands of businesses that rely on its platform. The move comes after Ukrainian drone strikes damaged 7 of its warehouses, wiping out around 10% of the company's storage capacity and leaving many sellers facing significant financial losses. A Wildberries seller said an entire shipment of pet food, worth around nearly $20,000, had been destroyed in the fire.
I opened my seller account and realized that everything there had been destroyed. I just sat down and burst into tears. What else can you do in a situation like this? Given the number of responsibilities I have, I don't know what to do next.
Large businesses were also affected. Clothing retailer Finn Flair estimated that around 35,000 items worth more than $1.2 million were destroyed in the damaged warehouses.
We plan to negotiate with Wildberries. Wildberries is one of our key partners. At the moment, we have information that Wildberries will be making compensation payments. They plan to start with smaller sellers because they were affected the most, and later they will compensate larger sellers as well.
Wildberries said it would need at least 30 days to assess the damage before compensation payments begin. The company has also announced reduced storage fees to support affected sellers. The Kremlin praised Wildberries for offering assistance to affected sellers despite having no legal obligation to compensate businesses. Officials are discussing possible support measures, including state-backed loans, tax breaks and subsidies, with state-controlled lender VTB expected to play a key role. No final decision has been announced. Ukraine said it targeted Wildberries because of its alleged role in supplying the Russian military and its financial ties with the VTB bank. Meanwhile, to cope with the storage crisis, Wildberries is reportedly looking to expand its logistics network in neighbouring Kazakhstan. While Kazakhstan's trade ministry says it has not yet received an official request for additional space, it remains open to the idea. The retailer is already constructing 2 massive hubs in Almaty and Astana to help redistribute goods and stabilise operations.
Now, Russia's Federal Security Service has charged Telegram founder with aiding terrorist activities. The agency said it has also begun procedures to place Pavel Durov on an international wanted list. The FSB alleges Telegram failed to remove channels and bots used to coordinate attacks, sabotage, and cybercrime inside Russia. It claims the platform was used by Ukrainian intelligence services and groups Russia designates as terrorists or extremists. There was no immediate comment from Durov or Telegram. Now, President Volodymyr Zelensky and President Donald Trump discussed Patriot air defense systems and diplomacy, while Ukraine also held direct talks with Iran following tensions over an Iranian-linked vessel. Together, these developments point to a broader effort by Kyiv to strengthen both its military position and its diplomatic influence. To help us unpack this is Lieutenant General Marco Serrone, joining us from Lisbon, Portugal. Good to have you, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me today.
Now, has Ukraine entered a phase where its greatest challenge is no longer winning support, but turning that support into strategic advantage? Hello, sir. Are you there, sir?
Hello. Yeah, but I lose the contact.
All right, I'm going to ask you again. I said, has Ukraine entered a phase where its greatest challenge is no longer winning support, but turning that support into strategic advantage?
Okay, good afternoon. I suppose that it's really the opposite. So the Ukraine now has a strategic advantage in the ground, and the support, I suppose, come from that. So the special support from the Americans. The American administration, of course, because it's the turning of the situation in the ground for a better situation in the last couple of months that lead to this kind of more support from the American side. That's what I think that is going on. So it's and of course Zelensky is very much expert to take that advantage in the diplomacy side. So it's something that is very it's good. He's very good on that, as we know.
All right.
But the main change was happening in the sea list is happening in the ground.
Now, Patriot systems strengthen Ukraine's air defenses. How do they strengthen Ukraine's position at the negotiation table?
That's one of the most difficult things that Zelensky and Ukraine has for the time being. So it's the lack of anti-ballistic missiles. And the situation, I suppose, is not going to change in the near future. So, and why? Because the Americans are also, they lack a lot of these kind of interceptors. So it's something that even, of course, could be that if the situation in the Middle East could evolve for a better situation without military operations, that some assets, not only from the United States, but even from Israel, it's a point that is being discussed. That could help the Ukrainians in the near future to have better capabilities to intercept ballistic missiles. But if the situation in the Middle East is still going on with military operations, I suppose that in the near future, the Ukrainians are not going to get missiles from the American factories. So it's because they are producing especially to the American armed forces. That's normal.
Now, speaking about getting missiles from the American factories, President Trump has renewed direct engagement with President Zelensky. What does that change in practical terms for Ukraine's strategy?
For the future, that will be important, because one of the things that Ukrainians do very good, it's to improve the capabilities to product military assets. And so I suppose that even if the Americans, especially the Lockheed Martin, that is producing the PAC-3 missiles, or Raytheon that is producing the PAC-2 missiles, if they deliver the technology, I suppose the Ukrainians are going to be able to produce that in a very let's say short time. When I speak about short time, is something that could take several months, of course, because that's not producing a missile, interceptor, Patriot, PAC-3 or PAC-2. It's not the same thing of that producing a drone, of course. But nevertheless, I suppose that they will be able, and with the support of other countries, because we know that even the Germans, they got the license to produce the interceptors in 2 or 3 years ago. Could be a joint venture that could produce missiles not only for Ukraine but also for the Europeans, and that could be produced in Ukraine or in Germany. Let's see. In a very short time. In short time, it's 6 to 10 months.
Mm-hmm. Now, Ukraine has now opened direct dialogue with Iran. Is Kyiv trying to change Tehran's behavior, or simply raise the political cost of supporting Russia?
Let's see. I suppose that is more trying to put Iran and Russia in the same picture. So. We know that Russia and Iran, they have a strategic partnership, so it's understandable that they support each other. It's something that it's not a matter of question of agree or not agree. It's the reality. So what I suppose that what Ukrainians try to address to Iran is that if they keep supporting Russia in the war against Ukraine, they are also a target. So it's something that the Iranians also did with the United Kingdom, as we saw in the last couple of days. So it's and of course the Ukrainians now have the capabilities to target and to hit the ships and the ports, of course, not only in Russia but also in Iran, in the Caspian Sea. So I suppose this is more a message, and trying to put also Iran and Russia in the spot of the international community, than a diplomatic move. That's my understanding.
Mm-hmm. Now, if Iran continues supporting Russia despite these contacts, does Ukraine still gain something from keeping that diplomatic channel open?
The diplomatic channel is always good, because it's better to at least to first to address the concerns by diplomatic means, then target indeed Iranian infrastructures. Nevertheless, it's important, of course, that Ukrainians also not only advise the Iranians about their concerns and their preoccupations about the support of Iran to the war in the war of Russia against Ukraine, and because it's something that the Iranians should be aware that Ukrainians are able to target Iranian ships in the Caspian Sea, and so it's a double track approach, diplomatic and with military means, of course, not in Iranian soil, not in Iranian country, But if the ships are having on board military assets to Russia, they could be a target in the Caspian Sea, of course.
Now that takes me to my next question. Can military strength still shape diplomacy in this war, or have those two tracks started moving independently?
No, they influence each other. So, but in the time of war, of course, the military vector, it's shape has the capability to shape more the diplomacy than the other way around. But the use of force, as we know, it's now on the table from every side. So it's not only Russia, not only Iranians. It's the US also. It's even Ukraine. Ukraine have turned their position in the ground in the war with Russia, having military capabilities that are capable to target and to hit Russian infrastructure. So the military assets are still military force. Are still I suppose in the times that we are where we are today, it's the most important thing. Of course, diplomacy. It's important also to try to figure out ways to solve the situations and discuss, because military force normally don't allow to have political discussions. So it's important to keep the two tracks in running.
That was Lieutenant General Marco Serrano joining us from Lisbon, Portugal. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Now, President Trump has held what he called a productive meeting with Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington. Their talks came as Washington weighs its next steps on Iran and Israel as Israel pushes for continued U.S. involvement.
US President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a nearly 90-minute closed-door meeting at the White House, with Iran dominating their talks. Netanyahu was expected to present intelligence suggesting Tehran was expanding activity at Pickaxe Mountain, a fortified underground facility near one of Iran's main nuclear sites. Hours before the meeting, Trump publicly criticized Netanyahu after details of the planned briefing appeared in the media. The US president said the Israeli leader wanted Washington to remain involved in the conflict. Trump has paused US airstrikes against Iran to give diplomacy another chance, while Israel remains concerned that Tehran could rebuild its nuclear capabilities.
I just finished an excellent meeting with President Trump. When I say excellent, it's not just lip service. A conversation with full partnership, mutual support, understanding of the common goal to ensure that Iran does not have nuclear weapons and other goals as well. This is one of the best conversations I have had with the President of the United States, our friend President Donald Trump. His entire senior team was there, and ours too. Here too there was an opportunity to exchange ideas and to coordinate important coordination for the security and future of the State of Israel.
Netanyahu's remarks presented a united front, despite months of differences over the Iran conflict and Israeli military action against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The leaders were also expected to discuss expanding the Abraham Accords, including possible Saudi participation. Riyadh has so far ruled out normalizing relations without a path towards Palestinian statehood. Sources said Netanyahu also sought Trump's support ahead of Israel's election on October 27th. The White House described the meeting as positive and productive, but no new agreement was immediately announced.
Meanwhile, an Israeli airstrike has hit a mosque in Gaza City. The explosion sent large plumes of smoke into the sky. It's reported that one person died when the Nuseirat refugee camp was hit, injuring at least a dozen people. The aftermath left hundreds of displaced people without shelter after their temporary encampment was destroyed. Now, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has held joint talks with the Greek and Turkic Cypriot leaders as part of a renewed effort to revive negotiations on the divided island. After separate meetings with both sides, Guterres said there was agreement to prepare another 5+1 meeting involving the two Cypriot communities, Greece, Turkey, and the United Kingdom. Guterres said he wanted the next round to deliver tangible results, warning that a continued deadlock would leave Cyprus exposed to more growing regional instability.
Based on our discussions on the way forward, I decided that I would convene another 5+1 meeting after adequate preparations on confidence building, methodology and substance, taking into account the convergences already achieved. Because I don't want to have more 5+1 meetings without result.
Now, Sudan's military says it has made further gains in North Kordofan, but the battlefield advances are being overshadowed by deepening humanitarian crisis. Aid agencies warn that civilians, especially children, are paying the highest price as the conflict enters its fourth year. Here's more.
The conflict in Sudan continues, with the army announcing new territorial gains in North Kordofan. The army chief, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has recently visited newly recaptured towns after the army says it had pushed the RSF fighters. The army says the operations aimed at expanding its control, but fighting remains active in parts across the state. The conflict continues. The humanitarian agencies warn that civilians are bearing the brunt. The UNICEF says at least 23 children have been killed in North Kordofan since May. The violence around Al Ubaid continues. The war in Sudan has now entered its fourth year, displacing more than 13 million people and leaving millions more in need of humanitarian assistance. So, despite the army gains, the humanitarian situation is likely to worsen even further. Naba Muhiddin for News, Khartoum, Sudan.
Now, 13 people are confirmed dead after a powerful earthquake struck southern Japan. Rescue efforts are continuing in Kumamoto Prefecture as experts warn of further seismic tremors.
Rescue teams continue to search for people trapped beneath the rubble on Wednesday after a 7.1 magnitude earthquake struck Kumamoto Prefecture in southern Japan. It knocked out power to thousands of homes and ruptured roads across the region. 8 people were pulled alive from the rubble of a partially collapsed shopping mall. However, the death toll has risen.
As of 8:30 a.m. local time, 23:30 Greenwich Mean Time today, we have confirmed 13 people dead and extensive damage, including human injuries, collapsed buildings, fires, and damage to roads and other infrastructure. I offer my deepest condolences to those who have lost their lives and to their bereaved families. I also extend my sincere sympathies to everyone who has been affected by this disaster.
Akio Yoshida, president of the Aeon collapsed shopping mall, has apologized after the explosion at the company's shopping centers following Tuesday's earthquake in Kumamoto Prefecture.
The company takes this incident, which occurred at one of our facilities, very seriously. We will provide all possible support for rescue efforts, following the directions of the self-defense forces, firefighters, police, local governments, and other relevant authorities. We deeply apologize for having caused such an outcome.
Hundreds of shoppers and staff had already been evacuated after the earthquake and watched as an explosion tore through the shopping center, sending debris across the car park. Yoshida said 3 employees were killed, 1 person suffered cardiac arrest, and 3 others remain missing. He added that a full investigation is underway to determine exactly what went wrong. Moreover, the earthquake struck about 20 kilometers south of Kumamoto City, which has a population of around 700,000. Part of the stone wall of Kumamoto Castle collapsed. Tourists who were inside fled to safety. Customers inside a Muji store in Kumamoto Prefecture took cover on the floor. Officials advised around 260,000 residents to go to evacuation centers. The Japan Meteorological Agency has warned that further strong earthquakes are possible in the coming week. There is also a continuing risk of landslides.
All right, after a break, we'll take a look at the top stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Now, Brussels has blacklisted a Russian energy giant that indirectly controls a company that powers Georgia's capital. Here's more on the story from Nini Nikolashvili in Tbilisi.
The European Union has added Russian state-controlled energy company Interro to its sanctions list as part of the bloc's 21st package of sanctions against Russia, approved on July 23rd. The Council of the European Union describes Interro as one of Russia's largest energy companies controlled by the Russian government. The move has raised questions here in Georgia because Interro indirectly owns a 75% stake in Telasi, Tbilisi's main electricity distributor, as well as electricity supplier Telmiko and Khrampesi first and second hydropower plants. Under EU sanctions rules, banks and companies based in the bloc may face restrictions on providing financial services or conducting transactions with entities that are directly or indirectly controlled by a sanctioned company. Although neither Telasi nor Telmiko has been sanctioned, their banking relationships could potentially be affected due to Interro's ownership. The National Bank of Georgia has sought to reassure the public, stating that local banks will continue providing services to Telasi because the company itself is not subject to sanctions and its uninterrupted operation is considered essential. The issue has also sparked political debate. Opposition representatives argue that the government had several years to reduce Interro's stake in Georgia's energy sector following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Among them, Levan Gogichaishvili of the Gacharia for Georgia party has called on the government to reduce Interro's ownership stake in order to address the impact of the EU sanctions. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Now, joining us now is Nika Chitadze, professor at the International Black Sea University, joining us from Tbilisi, Georgia. Good to have you, sir.
Good evening. Thank you for the invitation.
All right. What does the latest EU sanctions package tell us about the changing role of the South Caucasus in the Russia-Europe confrontation?
In my point of view, of course, those sanctions, 21st package of sanctions which have been adopted, by the European Union, will affect on the socio-economic situation in Georgia too. With regard to the RAO-S, you know, it's owner of 75% of the electricity distribution company Telasi. Yes, 75%, and also this company RAO-S controls Khrampesi. It's one of the hydro power station on the territory of Georgia, is the eastern part of Georgia, and we should take into consideration that the Telasi, by this way, was sold to the RAO-S in 2003, several months before the Rose Revolution. Before, owner of Telasi was AS Telasi, American company, but because of the reducing the price of securities of this American company, after company was forced to sell this company to RAO-S. Yes, in 2003. Still, this period, RAO-S controls, by this way, the electricity distribution in Tbilisi. First of all, even during the full-scale invasion of Russian Federation against Georgia in 2008, even during this period, this electricity relations between Russia and Georgia was continuing. And furthermore, we know here about the sanctions against Kulevi oil terminal, from where, by this way, Georgia was exported as oil products on the international market. And as a 2026, about 20% of the Georgian export was oil and oil products from the oil refinery station in the Kulevi. But the European Union, by this way, blamed the Georgian government in the importing of the Russian crude oil on the territory of Georgia, and after, by this way, re-export the oil products on the international market. Accordingly, taking into consideration all those factors, we should, I think, consider that I think all those factors will affect on the economic situation in Georgia, particularly during the last the 2-3 days. It was held the devaluation of the national currency lari.
All right. Now, Georgia has traditionally tried to maintain economic ties with Russia while pursuing closer European integration. How much room does Tbilisi still have for balancing that approach?
We know that officially Georgia, by this way, it's the candidate for EU membership. Georgia was granted as a candidate status in December of 2023. But unfortunately for today, because of the policy of the Georgian government, Georgia, by this way, is more approaching Russia from ideological or from geopolitical point of view, and at the same time it has some more and more distance, let's say gradually distance from European Union from the Western democratic community, which in my point of view will be negatively reflected on the political and socio-economic situation in Georgia, because when we are talking here about economy, we should mention here that more volume of foreign trade is coming on the share of Russian Federation than that of the 27 EU member states together.
All right, so now Azerbaijan has become increasingly important in Europe's energy and transport strategy. How does this wider sanctions environment affect Baku's regional role?
Yeah, of course, it's only should be welcomed that it is gradually increasing the volume of oil and natural gas export from Azerbaijan to the European market through the territory of Georgia. And I think that from one side, a problem related to the main electricity company in Georgia, I mean RAO-S or Ulevi oil terminal, can be by this way balanced by the fact that it is increased the transit role of Georgia. I mean here by this way is the transit of Azerbaijani oil and gas through the territory of Georgia to the European market. And I think that, of course, also, I mean, the full entrance to the exploitation as the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars-Akhalkalaki railway also will play a positive role and will somehow balance those problems related to the adoption of sanctions against the Russian company by the European Union, and some of those companies, they are still functioning on the territory of Georgia.
That was Nika Chitadze, professor at the International Black Sea University, joining us from Tbilisi. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Now, Turkey's President Erdogan says the country's state-owned oil production company has become a partner in Iraq's Kirkuk field. Speaking alongside Iraqi Prime Minister Ali al-Zaidi in Ankara, he described the newly signed energy agreement with Turkish Petroleum as an historic step. President Erdogan said the two countries were working on a new energy cooperation agreement and said that Iraq could supply Turkey with up to 1 million barrels of oil per day. He added that Turkey sees Iraq's peace and stability as closely linked to its own security and aims to expand cooperation in energy, transport and security.
British Petrol'ün operatörlüğünü yürüttüğü
The Kirkuk production field has been granted to Turkish Petroleum as a partner. The agreement signed today is a historic step in terms of partnership in the energy sector. We are striving to ensure that our region is known not for war, terrorism and conflict, but for development, prosperity, peace and stability. Turkey has never viewed Iraq's peace and stability separately from its own security, because Iraq is one of the countries that has suffered from war and instability. The Development Road project, which aims to connect the Gulf region to global markets through Iraq, has become even more important under the current regional circumstances. Ankara remains in close dialogue with Iraq to advance its terror-free Turkey process and its vision of a terror-free region.
The announcement comes as Iraq's Prime Minister makes his first official visit to Turkey since taking office. Adamor reports from Istanbul.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan welcomed Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Ali al-Zaidi to the presidential complex in Ankara on Tuesday evening, before the two leaders held closed-door discussions and addressed a joint press conference. Speaking to reporters, Erdogan said Turkey-Iraq relations had entered what he described as a more strategic phase, stressing Ankara's readiness to support Baghdad and step up bilateral ties. The two leaders said they had discussed a range of issues, including trade, energy, transportation, regional security, and counter-terrorism. Erdogan said terrorism had exacted a heavy price on the region, adding that Iraq and Turkey would continue working together to address common security threats. Energy was also a key focus, with the Turkish president saying Ankara hoped to sign a fresh energy framework deal with Iraq, following the expiry earlier this week of a previous framework agreement. He also said al-Zaidi had offered to supply Turkey with 1 million barrels of oil per day, adding that this would be more than enough to meet all of Turkey's energy needs. The two leaders also hailed the emerging Development Road project, a planned rail and road corridor that would link Iraq's Grand Fa port on the Persian Gulf to Turkey before continuing onward into Europe. The project aims to reduce transit times, diversify regional trade routes, and enhance Iraq's role as a key logistics hub, while also deepening economic integration with Turkey. Erdogan noted that bilateral trade had reached $7 billion in 2025, going on to voice confidence that Turkey-Iraq economic ties would continue to grow in the years ahead. The meeting ended before regional tensions escalated again overnight, with the United States and Saudi Arabia launching multiple strikes against targets in Iraq. al-Zaidi, for his part, has yet to issue a statement on the joint U.S.-Saudi operation. But speaking in Ankara, both leaders had stressed the importance of preserving peace in the region. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Now, the World Trade Organization has ruled in China's favor in a dispute over Turkey's restrictions on Chinese-made cars. Beijing is calling the decision a trade victory and urges Turkey to remove the measures.
China is claiming a trade win after the World Trade Organization ruled against Turkey's restrictions on Chinese electric vehicles and other cars. On Tuesday, a WTO panel found that Turkey's additional 40% tariffs and import licensing violated global trade rules. The dispute began in 2023, when Turkey introduced the measures as part of efforts to protect its domestic auto industry. China challenged the restrictions, arguing they unfairly targeted Chinese automakers and harmed bilateral trade ties. In its ruling, the WTO panel backed China's claims, saying Turkey's measures were inconsistent with international trade obligations, including rules on tax hikes and equal treatment of trading partners. China's Commerce Ministry now urges Turkey to comply with the decision and remove the measures. Beijing says it supports open trade and is ready to expand cooperation in electric vehicles and other new energy industries. The case comes as Chinese electric vehicle makers rapidly expand overseas, while governments in Europe and elsewhere consider tariffs and other barriers to protect their own auto industries.
Energy security is becoming an increasing concern for Kyrgyzstan as it works to keep fuel supplies stable. Officials are negotiating new deliveries from Moscow while turning to other suppliers to avoid shortages. Farze Kalimoziner has more.
Kyrgyzstan is seeking fresh fuel supplies from Russia as disruptions at Russian oil refineries continue to reduce exports. A government delegation is in Moscow negotiating monthly deliveries of 100,000 tons of petroleum products at market prices, according to First Deputy Prime Minister Danila Mangaldiv. The talks follow Ukrainian drone strikes that forced production cuts at several Russian refineries, limiting fuel available for export. The impact is significant for Kyrgyzstan, which imports more than 90% of its petrol from Russia. To reduce its dependence, Bishkek has signed contracts for diesel and aviation fuel from Belarus and China and is seeking additional supplies from neighboring countries. At home, the government has imposed an indefinite ban on petroleum product exports to safeguard domestic supplies through the end of the year. Officials also face rising import costs. Mangaldiv says petrol prices have jumped from about $860 to as much as $1,400 per ton under some recent contracts, driven by supply shortages and geopolitical tensions. And to ease the burden, the government has introduced the state-funded compensation scheme for suppliers of EI-92 petrol and diesel, while EI-95 will continue to be sold at market prices. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Now, Turkmenistan and Iran are looking to deepen cooperation in energy, trade and transport as officials from the two neighboring countries meet in Ashgabat. The discussions come as both sides seek to expand cross-border connectivity and strengthen economic ties across the Caspian Sea, or Caspian region rather. Our correspondent Severa Japova has more.
Turkmenistan and Iran have been discussing cooperation in energy, transport, construction, agriculture and trade. Turkmen President Serdar Berdimuhamedov met with Iranian Minister of Roads and Urban Development Faizaneh Sadegh Malvajerid and included talks with Turkmen Foreign Minister Rashid Meredov. Officials reviewed bilateral relations and agreed to strengthen the role of the Turkmen-Iranian Intergovernmental Commission on Economic Cooperation. Iran is one of Turkmenistan's leading trading partners, with annual trade approaching $600 million. Cooperation already includes natural gas swap agreement, electricity transmission and transport corridors, while both countries are working to increase cross-border cargo traffic to 20 million tons a year and establish joint free trade zones along their shared border. During the visit, Iran also congratulated Turkmenistan on the recent United Nations General Assembly resolution proclaiming 2028 the International Year of International Law, an agreement proposed by Ashgabat and co-sponsored by Tehran. It is Severa Japova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Kuwait's foreign minister is in Islamabad for talks aimed at expanding cooperation between the two countries. The visit comes days after Kuwait ratified a new defense agreement against the backdrop of recent attacks on the Gulf state. Miriam Zia has more from Islamabad.
Kuwaiti Foreign Minister Sheikh Jarrah Jaber Al Ahmed Al Sabah arrived in Islamabad on Tuesday. The visit came days after Kuwait ratified a 5-year defense cooperation agreement with Pakistan. The agreement was originally signed in 2023. Al-Sabah will hold talks with Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar and senior Pakistani leadership on Wednesday. The discussions are expected to cover bilateral ties, defense cooperation, and regional developments. The agreement expands cooperation in military training, intelligence sharing, defense technology, and joint exercises. It also establishes a joint military committee to oversee its implementation. The visit follows months of military and diplomatic engagement between both the countries. It also comes in the backdrop of recent attacks on Kuwait, underscoring the growing importance both sides attach to defense cooperation and regional security. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
Well, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.